Good afternoon, everyone. I would kindly ask the last one standing to please take a seat so we can get started. A very warm welcome to the physical audience here in the room, to our online participants that are watching the live stream of this first part. I'm waving to the camera there in the back. A very warm welcome to this 5th Helvetas Symposium, Driving Development Cooperation in a Changing World. My name is Antonia Dös. I'm a senior advisor in evaluation and learning based in Switzerland, and I have the pleasure of moderating this afternoon's symposium. A special welcome. We have over 300 attendees who are joining us from all over the world, registered participants from 61 countries. It's great to see so much interest in this very topical issue that we're treating this afternoon. If you are active on social media, such as LinkedIn or other platforms, and you wish to post about today's event, please use the hashtag Helvetas Symposium 2024 when you do so. We live in a changing world with many challenges and crises. And before diving into these conversations about how our sector should adapt and respond, we would like to listen to the people in the global south, the people we work with in the different continents, and we will hear how they experience these crises and what their hopes and wishes are.
Ahora sequía que está presentando ahora, no hay lluvia.
ধানের জমিও নষ্ট হয়েছে, ফসলও নষ্ট হয়েছে, শাকসবজিও নষ্ট হয়েছে।
Ця війна зруйнувала спокійне життя.
Y en la lucha estamos todos. Todos estamos en la lucha. Todos los días. Ser migrante no es fácil. Nos tocó pasar el río con el agua a la cintura, las maletas y los niños.
Morona rumbin nan yey, morona konda beri, mutulu jora lenga, kulo dokaki kadijin, kulo dokaki isuk.
На жаль, з міста Маріуполь, моє місто повністю зруйновано у 2022 році Росією. Моя мати померла, і наразі я навіть не маю змоги приїхати до неї на могилу, бо вона знаходиться в окупації.
Estos años está cambiando muy bruscamente. Digamos, lluvia cae y después congela, ¿no? Los ríos que habían grandes, eso están entrando poco a poco. Tanto para el animal y tanto para la chacra, no hay agua.
አሁን ችግሩ በጣም ውሃ ችግሩ ስለበዛ በጣም ድርቁ በዝቷል ብዬ ነው ማስቀመጠው። ችግር በጣም ተቸግረናል ብዬ ነው ማስቀመጠው።
कुछ सालन का वठी बारिशन जो सिलसिलो तमाम तेज हलियो आहे। इनमें असांजा फसल, असांजो बनियूं, असांजा ॿार, असांजी मईशत के तमाम वॾो नुक़सान थियो।
असां बारिश पाइण खां पोइ जाम पाणी ॿियो थी वियो, असांजे निकिरण जी ॿाहिरि घटी कोन्हे, असांजे घरनि में जाम बीमारी अची वई, हिकिड़ी मलेरिया, हिकिड़ी खारिश जी बीमारी।
Kwa mfano miaka ya nyuma, wakati ardhi ilikuwa bado haijawa na uchafuzi zaidi wa haya madawa ya kikemikali, nilikuwa navuna mazao mengi, lakini baada ya kuja haya makemikali tukawa tunatumia makemikali kwa wingi.
Mfumuko wa bei ya vyakula umesababishwa na ukame, kwa sababu huku kwetu sisi ni kukame sana.
असांजी पाणी जी निकाली तो बिल्कुल भी ना आहे। असांखे उम्मीद आहे गवर्नमेंट खां, इदारनि खां त असांजी सहकार सां असांजे पाणी जो निकाली जो
इदारे वारा हुकूमत वारनि खे असीं ईअं चऊं था त असांखे अहिड़ा को इंतज़ाम करे ॾे, असांजी जेको आहे बीमारियुनि खां असीं सिहतमंद रहूं, जान छुटी पए, ख़ारिश मां, ॿिए मां, इहे मलेरिया बुखार मां, ॿिए बीमारियूं जेको जाम थी वियूं आहिनि।
Ushauri wangu ni elimu kutolewa kwa wakulima, kuepuka ufugaji huria, kuepuka kutumia madawa ya kemikali ambayo yanapelekea kuharibu rutuba zetu, kuwashauri wakulima kutumia miti, pia wakulima watumie mbolea za mboji, mbolea za samadi zilizoiva ili kurutubisha udongo wetu na turudi katika hali ya kawaida.
Я бачу велике майбутнє в своїй країні, оскільки навіть зараз, у період війни, наша країна розвивається, до нас приїжджають міжнародні партнери, і це ознака того, що ми перспективні. Ми маємо родючу землю, ми маємо розумних та сміливих людей, а значить за нами велике майбутнє.
En este tiempo creo que estoy creciendo, me siento contenta de que ya tengo cuenta en el banco, ya voy a pagar mis impuestos, ya voy a ser una persona que puedo hacer muchísimas cosas, que puedo manejar mi economía y todo eso. Ya me siento útil, como quien dice, para la sociedad.
Thank you for these impressive statements, lived experiences, and voiced wishes and hopes collected by Helvetas colleagues from various countries. Let us remember their voices when we will talk about driving development cooperation in a changing world this afternoon. 2 questions were asked in this video. I now have a question for you, actually. This is the moment to take out your cell phones, please, and to either scan the QR code or go to slido.com, entering the code that you see there with the hashtag on screen. You could all be taking photographs of me now also. It looks really funny looking into so many cell phones. And the question I'd have for you is, what do you think are the 3 greatest current challenges for development cooperation? I'd invite you to write in keywords, not entire sentences, and please use singular words. We see the first answers coming in here. The bigger the words are, the more people have put in this answer. So we see in the very middle, funding and climate change, conflict, climate disasters, political instability, political situations, geopolitics, budget questions, women's rights, inequalities and how to tackle structural inequalities, the willingness, migration, youth, wars or war, nationalism, urbanization has been mentioned a few times. The code has been answered as well. Wrong priorities or governments may be linked with willingness, different perspectives, resilience, that we could also see in the video just now, power dynamics, corruption, good governance. I'll just give you another few seconds to see if this image is changing. Populism has been answered by multiple of you, financing, funding together. Thank you very much for these answers to what you see as the greatest current challenges for development cooperation. We will dive into some of these questions more in detail this afternoon. Please keep the Slido open. It will be also your possibility online as well as in the room to ask questions later on. You also have the possibility to rate questions. If you think it's a very pertinent, important one, you can give it a thumbs up, and we will try to tackle those with priority. Everybody here in the room, you will also have the possibility to raise your questions in person, but as I said, equally on Slido. And with that, I would like to introduce you to Melchior Lengsfeld, the Executive Director of Helvetas, who will give today's welcome address. Melchior Lengsfeld is, as I said, the Executive Director of Helvetas since 2005. before having worked in various field positions in India, Mozambique, and Mali. He's a member of the executive board of Alliance 2015, a strategic partnership of 8 European non-governmental organizations. And he also serves as the president of Alliance Sud, the Swiss Alliance of Development Organizations, is a member of the founding board and the executive committee of Swiss Solidarity, and has served on the Swiss and international board of the Fairtrade movement. Melchior, the floor is yours for the welcome address of this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonia, and it's such a pleasure to see you all. In a way, it's funny to see all those catchwords coming up and like conflict and war being present, but not the center of the attention. If you come here into the building, somehow the policy debate of the year is reflected. In the ground floor, we're having an event on defense. And here on this floor, we are talking about international cooperation. So maybe it brings it together. So, Excellency, dear members of the development community, friends of Helvetas, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted and also excited to see you all here, and really looking forward to the program of the afternoon. There's so many committed representatives from the NGO community in Switzerland, from government, from business, from research. So this is really fantastic to see how this topic captures the intention and how we are all sharing questions, how to best move our shared interests forward. Not only here in Bern, but of course also in many countries and online this afternoon. Welcome to this 5th Helvetas Symposium. Today we're here to talk about challenges and trends. Trends that shape the world, shape our sector, in times which are much more uncertain than we were used to. Most importantly for this afternoon, we don't just want to look at the trends, but also on ways how we can influence and shape them together. I won't attempt to list those crises and challenges. You all know them as well as I do. Increasing impacts of climate change, conflicts, economic turmoil. Maybe what's coming in addition is that we see shifts towards political introversion. We see skepticism towards multilateralism, a rise in protectionism and right-wing populism. So new elements over the past year coming into a mix of problems that we have seen for years. We also see a trend towards self-interest over collaboration. It's palpable here in Switzerland, but also in many other countries of the world. The elections in the US are finishing today. They are just one particularly influential factor in determining how far this regressive attitude will continue to take ground. Now, with global uncertainties and political tensions on the rise, it may seem a bit counterintuitive to remain confident that inclusive change will further progress. And it's therefore good to remember that many generations before us had their own reasons to feel the way we feel now, that the world is in a particularly bad shape, and that the clouds on the horizon, they look really threatening. And yet, we are here today and can learn from history that progress often follows uncertain times. And I say that just to put our doubtful outlook a bit into perspective what the future might bring. Actually, looking at the facts, I would like to recall that significant progress has been achieved in the global fight against poverty over the past decades. Until roughly the COVID pandemic and then the war against Ukraine, we were seeing profound progress. Not everywhere, but in many places. 30 years ago, 1/3 of the world's population, that's about 1.8 billion people, 4 times the entire population of Europe, lived in extreme poverty. By 2019, that share had massively fallen to under 10% of the world's population. Still around 700 million people. That's still much too much, but it's also a tremendous shift. During this time, access to education has significantly improved, and consequently literacy rates. We have seen similar progress in the reduction of hunger, in improving water supplies, among further good news. And as a result, global life expectancy rose by full 9 years over the past 3 decades. I find them personally really impressive statistics. And it's not just a handful of numbers, but it's the fastest and largest reduction in global poverty in human history. So such tectonic changes, they don't just happen by chance. They are foremost the merit of better policy and social services by national governments. They also reflect the rise of an often dynamic local and national private sector in many countries. International cooperation has been an important piece of the puzzle. So our contribution has been varied between the countries. Certainly, the relevance of international cooperation has been higher for left-behind populations than for mainstream economic development. Maybe most importantly, those statistics illustrate that together we have it in our hands to progress toward a world with fairer opportunities for more people. Positive change does not happen by coincidence, so these statistics, for me, they also illustrate that we must act if we want to make a difference. We live in times of transition, and the role of development cooperation is not only reinterpreted from the outside, with an obvious temptation to link international cooperation to domestic interests of donor countries. Development cooperation itself is evolving, with actors in the Global South playing increasingly strong roles. These questions about how development cooperation, its actors, and their relations are changing is the focus of the first part of the symposium. After the break, we will look then more closely how Switzerland is positioning development cooperation in its own view. What we see is that Switzerland and many other European countries are reducing development funding rather than stepping it up to respond to populist trends at home and the war in Ukraine. In our view, it's certainly short-sighted, and it's also oddly out of sync with the global needs that we see and also our best self-interest. So in periods of crisis and turmoil, it's good to have a shared reference. From the perspective of sustainable development, this vision actually exists. The framework for joint action are the SDGs, passed by the UN General Assembly in 2015. And even though progress towards those goals has been insufficient, its vision continues to provide a powerful reference for actors both in the North and in the Global South. A reference point which is certainly important to remember in a time when political divisions are increasing and the common European project is threatened by populist nationalism and the specter of war. Keeping this shared vision in mind and on our policy agendas can contribute to resist global fragmentation, which is probably the overarching threat of our time. I've mentioned the importance of confidence, but confidence alone is not enough. We also need to remain perseverant as a sector. Thoughtful, perseverant action is key if we want to continue making a difference. And therefore we set the topic of today's symposium, Driving Development Cooperation in a Changing World, as a space to reflect together. How does our sector, how do we need to change to ensure that together we provide the best possible complement and support to the pro-poor policies and actions in poorer countries? And through that to contribute to a better and to a safer world. I thank you already now that you take all this interest in those questions this afternoon, but also through your work and all what you do in Switzerland and internationally to help us all move in a better direction. And I really look forward to an insightful and inspiring afternoon. And I'm also confident that through the different inputs and dialogues, every one of us will find at least one idea to take home and to act upon. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Melchior, for reminding us of the importance of partnership and cooperation. I know that our next speaker, Catherine Naviaku-Dahu, who is with us online today, will have something to say about partnership and cooperation as well, especially between the Global South and the Global North. Catherine works at the Overseas Development Institute, ODI. She's the director of ODI's Politics and Governance program, where she leads a team of political economy experts. With over 25 years of experience, she's recognized for her expertise in politics, peace building, and corporate accountability in conflict-affected areas. She holds a PhD in politics and international relations from the University of Oxford and an MA in area studies from SOAS. She has worked with various international organizations, including the OECD and Oxfam. Catherine, welcome very much at the Helvetas Symposium this year. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to share some slides. 1 second. Great. Brilliant. Okay, so delighted to be with you here today. I was invited to give this keynote, which is a real pleasure. And when I was first invited, I think I was listed as somebody who would bring a global South perspective to the conversation. And, when I first heard this, I had a profoundly allergic reaction to this, not simply because there are so many global South perspectives, because I felt it wasn't a label that fitted me particularly well. So like most people in this room, real and virtual, I'm not from the field. I'm not living and working in the global South. And I'm not here to provide experiences that can be analysed by somebody else. I'm someone who was born in Scotland, grew up in London, studied in Oxford, as has been said, thank you, and I've worked for a number of years in this international development field, in NGOs, in multilaterals, and so on. And for most of that time, I've been sitting comfortably in the global north. But on reflection, however, after my allergic reaction, I suppose the perspective I want to bring today could be considered as of the South. So even though I've worked in international development, I haven't necessarily been of it. Let me explain myself. So born to Nigerian parents in Scotland when the Biafra War was raging, I grew up fearing the sight of kwashiorkor, pot-bellied children on TV, which was a source of extreme embarrassment and discomfort. Biafra was where Médecins Sans Frontières was born, and my personal baptism of fire in international development took place in 1994, when I happened to be employed as a junior researcher in an NGO working on Rwanda. I saw firsthand what I felt very strongly was a circus of humanitarian action, appeals that sprung up overnight, an inordinate power hanging off the shoulders of many fresh-faced, inexperienced recent graduates like myself who found themselves suddenly catapulted face-to-face with ministers with plenty of work to do. So why do I say this? I start off like this because I want to suggest, and it's part of the talk I want to give here, that we are in a moment, an important transition moment in this sector, where the importance of shifting our gaze and moving, in fact, beyond the words cooperation and partnership and development cooperation are really vital to see from the perspective of those to whom development is done and rise to that occasion. So I want to just show you, if I can move this slide. Sorry, it seems to have been stuck. Right. I want to go through a few things in this short talk. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been doing at ODI to reconsider our approach to development cooperation, what it means in the light of this rising critique about the need to decolonize. Secondly, I'd like to, refer to some of the mutations taking place, which Melchior also referred to in the Global South, demanding that we reconfigure our gaze. And then finally, some interesting proposals that seem to be on the table about what a reconfigured development cooperation rationale could look like. But before doing that, if I've got a bit of time, I just want to ask you to take a look at this image. So this image is just taken from the publicity for this symposium. And I want you just to reflect a little bit on what is actually in the image for 1 second. And then perhaps just think a bit about the words at the bottom of the slide, driving development cooperation in a changing world. So as you'll see from that image, we have cars on a road that seems to be leading to a kind of dystopian reality of where climate change has created flooding. So there are cars on the road. They don't seem to be moving very much. Yet the title is about driving. And I want to just ask us to ponder this question of driving. Who is in the driving seat? And are we presuming, can we afford the luxury of presuming in this changing world that the driving will be done by people sitting in this room? So on to what we've been doing at ODI. So as I said, we, over the last 4 years, really, in light of what happened in the George Floyd moment, as we've come to call it, and also at the height of what we experienced as vaccine apartheid, essentially, we started really doing a serious rethink about how we were doing our business, how we were, given our status as a think tank of renown, producing expert knowledge. And we started to acknowledge the need to not just do that evidence gathering and that expertise giving in full just partnership with the Global South. So they were actually bringing them in and creating the space where they would be part of analysing the reality. But we also realised that we had to bring a decolonial lens into the way we were even thinking about our bread and butter issues, notably questions of economic development, questions of trade, and questions of climate sustainability. We acknowledged, because the conversation was very heated at the time and continues to be heated, that development really needs to address itself to the structural challenges. I noted in the wordsmithing introduction, there were some references to this. But for us, this question of structural imbalance, structural power imbalance, really needs to be considered very seriously. And the decolonizing agenda is putting this up front and center. We're also, ODI obviously is not alone in recognizing the importance of the reckoning. We also feel that organizations like Helvetas, who've long acknowledged the need for, thinking about power relationships systematically. I'm referring to the inclusive systems approach. Lend themselves to kind of considering these structural questions. But I think the time is ripe for taking this a little bit further. A few words on another, this is my last piece, actually, so a few words on the other conversations in light of this decolonizing move that we've been convening at ODI. So for some time, we've been very engaged in the question around localization, locally led development, to which Melchior alluded. But we also believe that there's a real need for a sustained, deep conversation between providers of development assistance about what development cooperation needs to look like in what we're calling or questioning could be a post-aid world. ODI has been, orchestrating a series of dialogues. They're going to run over the next 12 to 18 months, where we're really asking people in this room, and particularly people in senior leadership positions in development agencies, to come together and agree on what needs to be a new narrative and a new rationale for development cooperation in light of some of the challenges that were listed by Melchior: declining appetite, rising populism, and so on and so forth. Those conversations are very incipient. We're yet to come to big conclusions, but there's some interesting observations that are already coming to the fore. And really, if we're going to get to where Melchior referred to in terms of seeing if we can really make these SDGs that we committed to in 2015 really meaningful as a kind of a guiding star, a North Star for where we want to get to, we might have to start thinking about development assistance, not just as a temporary measure, not just as an avenue for addressing poverty, but we might want to think about it as part of a bigger puzzle of relationships between the would-be developing and developed world that we really need to bridge across a number of domains. Development assistance, of which there seems to be decreasing appetite, needs to be just one of a number of different instruments that we take account of. ODI is particularly interested in some of the ideas that are being flagged at the moment around the pooling of resources to address global challenges, where questions like mutuality, everyone pooling into a common pot, the South also contributing or acknowledging the contributions of the South that exist, and bridging, back across governments, so not just seeing aid agencies or development ministries in isolation, but thinking about them as part of a bigger cross-governmental effort to address the global challenges that we face. We believe, as is not rocket science to observe, that if we're going to get to this point, we really need serious heads of state level commitment to turn around the narrative. And I just want to flag for you a particularly interesting set of ideas that seems to capture some of these initial observations that are being fielded by the platform Global Nation, led by Jonathan Glennie and others, that are calling for global public investment. Many of you might have seen these slides already, so apologies if you have. But one thing I think is really, if you're going to take anything away from what I'm saying today, I think is the importance of this idea of pooling energies and efforts north to south in a sustained way to address some of these global challenges. Traditionally, development assistance has been seen as a quick fix, or supposed to be a fix to enable countries to graduate. I think the challenges, particularly the insecurity challenge that we all face from climate, from conflict, suggests that we need to think differently about the role that development cooperation can have as part of a bigger effort for cooperation between countries for our own collective existential future. I think that's all I want to say. I thank you for having given me this opportunity, and I'm wishing you all an excellent symposium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for this insightful, powerful, and thought-provoking keynote, inviting us to think of a bigger puzzle and of pooling energies and efforts. I am happy to welcome our second keynote speaker of this first part of the afternoon, Shobhini Mukherjee. Since 2011, Shobhini Mukherjee is the director of the South Asia Regional Center of the Jameel Poverty Action Lab, JPAL, a research center dedicated to applying research to poverty reduction. She is passionate about the use of evidence and data in policymaking and advises multilateral organizations as well as donors on the effectiveness of policy spending. With Nobel laureates such as Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, she has worked on large-scale randomized trials of basic education in India and developed literacy programs that have proven effective and are currently being scaled up in several Indian states and parts of Africa to reach more than 60 million children. And Shobhini is also, last but not least, a member of the board of directors of Helvetas. Shobhini, we're very much looking forward to learning from your expertise on impact measurement and beyond. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to try and keep this a bit broader. So I think the moment you hear the Poverty Action Lab, JPAL, you think of randomized controlled trials, you think a lot of data is going to be shoved your way. So I'm going to try not to do that. I'm going to try speaking a bit broadly in terms of some of the challenges that we are seeing today, and the role that international development cooperation can play. And thank you again for the opportunity to represent my country, India, at the Helvetas Symposium. And today's theme, driving development cooperation in changing world, is both timely and critical as we gather, as Melchior pointed out, in an era marked by complex, interconnected challenges. We've seen the devastating impacts of climate change to widening inequality and the continuing pandemic recovery. The path ahead for international cooperation, frankly, is marked with a lot of uncertainties. But I'm also an eternal optimist, and that's what keeps me in this job. I've been here for 25 years now. It's filled with opportunities to create impact, to improve the lives of millions through collaborative effort. I'm speaking today from the perspective of South Asia, and more specifically as an Indian, having spent 25 years in India working on program management and research and focusing on poverty alleviation and testing solutions aimed at reducing poverty. So I have lived and I was listening to Catherine. So I hope, Catherine, I qualify because I've lived and worked in India. I have slept in village school buildings. I have slept in water tanks. I've fallen into latrine pits while doing my research on sanitation. So I mean, that aside, I think let me focus back on what I want to say here. So my last decade has been focused on partnerships across governments, academia, and multilateral organizations to scale rigorously tested solutions that drive real impact. And I've seen that international collaborations have played a significant role here in offering not only financial expertise, but also technical expertise and best practices to support poverty alleviation, a lot of innovations around climate resilience and digital inclusion. And with India's economic growth, these partnerships have increasingly shifted towards mutual benefit, emphasizing sustainable development and capacity building for long-term progress across multiple dimensions. And one important shift that I see when I look at our country in India, and actually many global South countries as well, is that countries have increasingly directed their, let me see if I can get, perfect. That's my first slide. So I think one important shift I see in the last 30 years is that many governments, particularly in the global South, have increasingly directed their resources towards tangible goals, aligning their strategies to the Sustainable Development Goals, and building upon the foundation laid by the MDGs. So this commitment has been pivotal in ensuring measurable outcomes, whether it's improved nutrition, access to healthcare, or quality education. And I've seen governments, actually in India, for instance, we have had districts ranking themselves on meeting these SDGs, for instance. And it's really remarkable to see this evidence-based approach that we see with governments today. And exactly, and one of the key drivers of this success has been the commitment of policymakers who today are better equipped with knowledge, actionable strategies, and a major shift towards a more pragmatic use of evidence and decision-making, with learning and adapting along the way. And it's led to a lot of progress that's concrete and measurable. So if I give some examples from India, India's under 5 mortality rate, and now I'm going to talk about a few data points here. India's under 5 mortality rate has decreased from 90 to 34 per 1,000 live births between 2000 and 2020, largely due to government commitment, but also international support from alliances like Gavi's investment into India's immunization program. Similarly, we have achieved now near universal enrollment in elementary education in the last 20 years with a 95% rate. And I remember when I was starting out in the early 2000s, it was about 80% enrollment rates. So we've been able to achieve this through government investments and support from institutions like World Bank and USAID, who've really put in a lot of effort and resources into partnerships with the Indian government. And if I talk about Switzerland, India's partnership with Switzerland particularly has been transformative, focusing on sectors like pharmaceuticals, financial services, machinery, precision instruments, clean energy, and so on. And these have led to job creation, skill development, technology transfer, and have fostered sustainable growth, economic growth. So today, I think the Swiss foreign direct investment in India has reached close to 4.5 billion Swiss francs by 2021, making Switzerland a leading European investor in the country. So pulling back on these initiatives now could unravel years of progress. And South Asia, home to a quarter of the world's population, we cannot afford this setback. So according to UN institutions, a 30% cut in core aid support would leave millions without access to clean water, basic education, and vital healthcare services. And these are not just numbers. They represent human lives, lives of children, lives of families, and women whose futures are at risk. So as we approach 2030, and this is, I'm just saying it's a nice round number, but I also believe that there are many goals that we've been put ourselves to achieving by 2030. We are faced with a world that is changing rapidly. So while we move beyond the recent pandemic, the potential for future health crisis does remain. Geopolitical shifts have left many poorer nations bearing the brunt of consequences they did not create, whether it's the debt crisis or inflationary effects that ripple from economies like those in the European Union. And governments in low and middle income countries, particularly in the global south, are struggling to respond to these threats, while many high income nations are becoming increasingly inward focused. And as global aid budgets shrink, the pressure on governments and civil society to address these challenges is growing. And in my own work, I have seen at the Poverty Action Lab, we've seen a reduction in unrestricted funding, smaller budgets, shorter timelines, and limited administrative support, all essential for organizational growth. So let me talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we will continue to face in India. Studies showed that primary school students in India lost between 1.5 and 2 years worth of learning during COVID-19 due to school closures. In some cases, this translates to not acquiring almost 2/3 of the math and language skills they would normally acquire in a school year. And according to the World Bank, students in South Asia, including India, could face a lifetime earning loss of over $400 billion due to the skills they were unable to acquire due to prolonged school closures. And even today, this week, schools in North India are shut because of pollution. It's a long story. We have farmers burning their crop in the neighboring state of Punjab. So therefore, all schools in Delhi are shut because we have a huge problem of pollution. According to the World Bank, students in South Asia, including India, could face a I've talked about this. So let me talk about health, actually. Moving on, I have a few areas that I thought I would talk about today. So in health, we were ranked 111th out of 125 countries in the 2023 Global Hunger Index with widespread malnutrition and stunting. We have a growing burden of non-communicable diseases in India. India is home to 77 million people with diabetes, expected to double by 2045. And you can imagine what strains it will put on our systems. So it will make us one of the highest diabetes-affected populations in the world. Additionally, the elderly in India is expected to reach about 20% of the population by 2050. So that would mean 1 in 5 Indians will be over the age of 60, creating significant implications for our healthcare, social security, and economic systems. And the experiences of India and Africa during COVID-19 are cruel reminders, unfortunately, that without strong preparation and international cooperation, it is hard to withstand such shocks. With 5 hospital beds per 10,000 people in India, and the global average is 27 to 1,000. And in India, it's 5 hospital beds per 10,000. During COVID-19, hospitals faced severe shortages of beds, oxygen supplies, and essential equipment. Our gender gap remains concerning as well, with only 24% women participating in the workforce. So UNICEF has reported that post-pandemic, 10 million girls were at risk of not returning to school due to economic pressures and increased domestic responsibilities. And this particularly impacts adolescent girls. Climate, of course, the threat of climate change is growing ever more urgent. And not just climate for climate itself, climate and energy, it's you're looking at intersectionality between poverty, inequality, and vulnerability for billions. So here we're talking about the effects on education, the effects on health, the effects on productivity, and what have you. And alongside these challenges, artificial intelligence is sparking major upheavals, reshaping industries, and changing the nature of work. So countries in the global south, including India, will have to prioritize skill development in the age of AI, but also invest in social protection and build resilient health systems ready for the next pandemic or any other crisis that we face. So I do want to also spend a few minutes talking about the shrinking space for civil society. In recent years, governments around the world, including in India, have enacted laws and policies that restrict activities of civil society organizations. In India, the amendment of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, the FCRA, in 2020, has made it more difficult for civil society organizations to access foreign funding, limiting their ability to work on key development issues, and making it more difficult to hold governments accountable, and delivering essential services to the most marginalized. So at a time when civil society organizations are needed more than ever, these restrictions are stifling the potential for drive development change. So let me give a few examples and move to a slightly more optimistic sort of nature of the conversation. So I do want to talk about the fact that as we grapple with these realities, there is a pressing need for greater ambition in shaping social policy with scientific evidence, supporting local capacity, and investment in human capital. And the role of collaboration cannot be overstated. So I'd like to pause here and highlight that the role that the European Union and key development partners like FCDO, European Research Council, IKEA Foundation, but also many, many more organizations, sort of the Gates Foundation, Co-Impact, USAID, etc., have played and continue to play in creating a more dynamic landscape for innovation. So they have funded cutting-edge research and programs that are far more fundamental to understanding the general equilibrium outcomes across key areas like education, climate, energy access, and labor markets. National and international cooperation with local and international NGOs have enabled huge success of aid, innovations, and sharing of best practices. So these are just highlights from the partnerships, the Poverty Action Lab's partnerships with what international funding has enabled, and collaboration with INGOs, for instance, BRAC, Care International, Save the Children, Helvetas, for instance, and transformative education and livelihood programs emerging from innovations in India, in the global south, in India, in Bangladesh, have reached several million women and children across the world. So 2 examples here that I'd like to point out. Pratham is an NGO in India. Their Teaching at the Right Level program, tested in India and expanded to Africa, has helped 60 million children acquire foundational skills. And these have been tested rigorously across 6 randomized evaluations. BRAC's livelihood program, emerging from Bangladesh for the extreme poor women, has reached over 50 million so far across the world to bring the extreme poor out of poverty. Some of the innovative topics we've been able to research through flexible funding include male preferences for unemployed spouse, laws, norms, and prejudices around gay rights in India, improving social inclusion in private schools, and so forth. The second quick example that I would like to give in terms of what international cooperation can really achieve, we've made significant progress under the CLEAR initiative for building capacity of policymakers and civil society actors in the South Asia region. The CLEAR initiative was established by the World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group in 2010 to enhance monitoring, evaluation, and learning capacities across low and middle income countries to help strengthen their many capacities to accelerate poverty reduction. So it's a part of the CLEAR network. We are a part of the CLEAR South Asia, hosted at IFMR, is a part of the CLEAR network and a core implementing partner of the Global Evaluation Initiative. And it's received considerable support from the European Union, including Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Switzerland. So, but the worrisome part is that the amount of support and commitment is reducing year on year for this important work. Every year we are told, be sustainable. But how? Most of our capacity development is with smaller nonprofits and with governments. One doesn't have the capacity to pay, and the other cannot due to bureaucratic constraints, at least in India. So I was asked what should be the priorities for international cooperation in the coming decade. So while I stand here today, as with Melchior, with a deep sense of concern regarding recent decisions to reduce development aid. The magnitude of these cuts threatens to undermine the very foundation of international solidarity and compromise decades of progress made in poverty alleviation, health, education, gender equality, what have you. Development aid is not a gift, but an investment, and an investment in a stable, secure, and prosperous world for all. So first and foremost, I don't think this needs too much of reiteration, but we must continue to address the pressing challenges of climate change and environmental sustainability. And everybody saw what was on top of mind when we did that little quiz just now. Health security must remain a top priority if we ensure equitable health access to healthcare and vaccines for everybody. And as AI and digital technologies continue to evolve, we must ensure that they are harnessed to promote inclusivity rather than deepen exclusion for underserved communities. And this is a real threat in developing countries. Addressing gender equality, human rights, and social justice remains central to building a just and equitable world. And as we prepare the youth for a changing job market and promote lifelong learning, education and skill development will continue to remain in focus. And lastly, as we urbanize rapidly, there will be increasing pressures on housing, transport, and waste management in growing cities. So governments, NGOs must think differently, innovate, and leverage emerging technologies to develop cost-effective solutions. We must maximize the reach of effective social programs, build coalitions, and elevate proven models to tackle development challenges. We need to invest in human capital and research infrastructure, more people, growth-friendly funds to support mentorship, research funding, and capacity building for greater exposure. So I'll end here by saying that it's more like a call to action. Development is not a zero-sum game. It is a shared responsibility. Supporting the Global South contributes to global stability. Stronger economies in South Asia create new markets for Europe. Improved health and education systems reduce the burden of disease and poverty, fostering a more secure world for all. By cutting aid now, the EU risks creating conditions that breed instability, exacerbate inequality, and trigger migration pressures that will ultimately impact Europe itself. In times of crisis, international solidarity must be strengthened, not weakened. With the support of the international community together, we have the power to shape a future that is inclusive, equitable, and just, and a future where no one is left behind, and where sustainable development goals are not just aspirational, but achievable. Thank you.
Many thanks, Shobini, for sharing your insights and taking us on a mental journey to India and the SDGs in this context and providing this outlook, what priorities in international cooperation could be. We are now moving on to the first panel discussion of this afternoon, and I have the pleasure of introducing my namesake, Antonia Potter-Prentice, who will be chairing the discussion around donor strategies. Antonia is an experienced leader in the humanitarian development and peace-building sectors with 28 years of experience in the not-for-profit sector. She has worked with organizations like Oxfam GB, Save the Children, and co-founded the Athena Consortium focusing on gender and the women, peace, and security agenda. Currently, she directs Alliance 2015, a strategic partnership of European humanitarian and development organizations aimed at enhancing impact through collaboration. A very warm welcome, Antonia. I'm looking forward to listening to the discussion.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my deep honour as Director of Alliance 2015, of which Helvetas is such an important member, to moderate this discussion. And this part of the afternoon is where you get to hear some donor perspectives. Apparently, we're heading for a post-aid world or a post-donor world, so let's hear what the donors have to say. So it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage, some in person and some on the screen, my panelists. I'm not going to go in great depth into their biographies, which are as, if not even more impressive than those you've already heard, in the interests of time. So I will content myself with sharing you their current titles and encourage you to go and look up their amazing achievements online. So if I could invite my first panelist, please, which is Nicole Ruder. She's here at home. She is the Assistant Director General, Ambassador and Head of the Multilateral Affairs and NGO Division of the agency, still called, I think, Swiss Development Cooperation. So it's still in the title. That's something that's encouraging. I think, Nicole, welcome. My second invitation is to a colleague from Sweden. Maria Melving is the Head of Unit for Western Balkans and Turkey for Swedish SIDA. Also an agency that still has development in its title. So I'm happy about that as well. Maria, a warm welcome to you. We're also going to have Shabini is going to come and join us on the stage because she's going to have an opportunity to respond, as will Catherine, who's still with us online, to the discussions we're about to have. And finally, I want to welcome Sabine, who is joining us from the European Commission in Brussels. Sabine Zwanepol is the head of unit for the Resilience, Peace and Security unit of the European Commission. And I think we have to be very appreciative because it's actually her second day in this job. This is what happens when the Commission is doing the merry-go-round of a new college of commissioners and a new set of institutions. But she comes extremely well prepared for the job because I believe she was the deputy in the unit before. But I do want to say thanks, Sabine, for prioritizing this symposium on your second day in this really important job. So let us get started. Oops, thank you very much, Matthias. I'm going to start asking you, Nicole. You've heard, I think, some things that would have been very familiar to you about the challenges we face, about the fact that we actually have made a lot of progress. Development does work, but maybe some radical different opinions about how things might look in the future and the paradigm shift. So I wanted to ask you a little bit, what was your reaction to what you've heard? And to maybe give us a flavor of the institutional shifts that you are seeing coming for the challenges that we're facing in the future, given that these issues with which we're so familiar, humanitarian assistance, development assistance in the old parlance, are obviously part of your, absolutely part of your mandate and part of Switzerland's relationship with the rest of the world. So, Nicole, please tell us what you're thinking.
Thank you very much. And all of this in 3 minutes, of course.
Well, you've actually got 5.
No, look, thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me this afternoon. I really listened with great interest to the two speakers. Shabini, I think I'm a big fan of data and evidence-based numbers to also make the case for investing, as you called it, in development cooperation in the largest sense. Last week, I was at the annual meetings of the World Bank, and we presented a report on the cost of interpersonal violence. And people become very attentive when you tell them that it costs Switzerland 8.3% of GDP, just the cost of violence in Switzerland. And suddenly it becomes an economic issue and not an issue of conflict that happens somewhere else. And you have a completely different type of conversation. So I'm a big believer in numbers. But I was also, of course, struck by the presentation by Catherine, because I like your vision of global cooperation, and I like your vision of all contribute, all benefit, all decide. You're sketching out a new vision of a true United Nations. Being a big fan of multilateralism and the idea that we can expand that, I love it. But I think it's also my role here to infuse a little bit of realpolitik. And it was definitely your role to give us a vision of what we might be aspiring to. So yes, over the last 25 years, also thanks to globalization, to the internet, to social media, there has been a convergence of understanding of our global challenges. The challenge that no country can solve by themselves. There has been the consensus of the Agenda 2030. Now, people were asking, would we have gotten that consensus today? I was greatly reassured when 4 weeks ago at the UN General Assembly, the Pact for the Future was concluded by consensus. Now, have we made huge progress? No. But have we gone backwards? No. at the very last minute, the Russian Federation wanted to break the consensus on a text that was essentially reaffirming the Agenda 2030. It was the African group of countries who stopped them from doing so. I find this a good thing. So the Agenda 2030 gave us the understanding of universality. We're all in this together. It is not a developing country agenda. We also talk about partnership, and I consider the Agenda 2030 a partnership, a teamwork of humanity that takes a bit of everybody. So this is the good part. The but is the realpolitik of geopolitics being back. There is not just a shift, but a battle for the global distribution of power. Now, some of it justified. The system has not been entirely fair if we look at it from the outside. But it's military, it's economic, and it's about influence. Now, what we find in this rebalancing exercise a bit irritating is that the BRICS countries in particular have a reason to be more assertive, to establish their weight in the world. But it's very irritating that they're all so very much authoritarian. It is also very irritating that they vilify us as the collective West, who has to pay reparations because we got rich on their backs. Now, it's irritating because they're not completely wrong, but they're also not completely right. And what is particularly grating is that this question whether human rights and democracy are actually a central element and a prerequisite to sustainable development or not. I have a personal answer. To me, they are 100%. But are they? Or is this a question of timelines? Short term, long term, medium term? All questions that are uncomfortable because there's no black and white answers to them. And then you have this dichotomy where we have a global understanding of common challenges, of global challenges that we can only solve together. And this is true and it's real. And you have this geopolitical battle on the other side, and it's completely contradictory, and it's happening simultaneously. The fallout of all of this dichotomy is the polycrisis situation. I don't know where we're going to go once we are done with polycrisis. We're running out of adjectives. So what comes after the polycrisis? These polycrises, they come with a huge human cost. And I agree with Catherine when she says, well, the concept of ODA, of official governmental development assistance, is not going to fix this. She's absolutely right. It's not going to fix it. But the global ODA volumes are not meeting the expectations. I don't think they can meet the expectations. ODA is no substitute for political will. And ODA cannot right something that was wrong in the past. But ODA is the instrument that we have today. And I believe we have to be very clear about why we spend taxpayers' money on international cooperation. I don't like the word development. I prefer to talk about international cooperation. And we need to be careful and smart about how we spend this money. I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to stop here.
That is incredibly appreciated. And I'm sorry that you don't have more time, but I think you've already given us a lot to chew on in terms of coming from the realm of aspiration and vision, which is always really important, down to the reality of the fact that we have a political issue, a resources issue. I mean, some people might say it's a resources issue about what we choose to spend our money on as opposed to not having enough money overall. But that is another question we could maybe come back to. But I'm now going to give the floor to Maria from Swedish SIDA to answer really the same question. I mean, what are your reflections and reactions to what you've heard, and what can you tell us about how SIDA is adapting to the challenges that you see in terms of delivering the SDGs and humanitarian assistance into the future? Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, and thank you all for very interesting speeches. My head is full of reflections, but I think that the global challenge, especially when it comes to climate and climate change and its effects, is of course something that we have to face. And it's also true that when societies are put into heavy stress, they react negatively. And so sometimes I think that what we see of polarization in this world, actually moving into violence and war, is somehow linked to this stress. So what can we do? Well, I think there's a lot of mentioning of joining forces. We need to actually work together and find synergies between us as different partners, different actors, and different countries and regions that globally want to change this. And I think it's important to keep the long-term perspective. I like that post-development sort of scenario. That's where we have to fix our eyes, you know, what will happen later, how can we reach there, and to have a very long perspective. I also think it was very interesting to hear about sort of these structural challenges that we face, which is also very true. How do we balance the tradition we got from some people giving and some people receiving? And I think that goes for everyone, all of the partnership that we have, all the way from civil society, all the way to the donors. I mean, also civil society has sometimes in this structure, sometimes became more accountable to donors than to the people they represent, actually. And that is also something that we have to work on. And donors can maybe also assist a bit by giving core support, supporting civil society in its own right. But I think also civil society has something to work on in this matter. So yes, yes, and this thing of working together to see that we are different actors that can contribute to development. It's civil society, independent media, of course, government structures and all levels, it's academia, and it's private sector. And we have to try and find synergies that we can sort of work together and to move forward. And in that picture, I sometimes, you know, think about this concept of collective intelligence, which means actually that a group of people can be sort of have more knowledge than each person in the group, and that goes also, I think, for us as actors. So yes, those were a few of my things that came up in my head when listening to these interesting presentations.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I think we heard an interesting challenge there, like a necessity for the role of civil society going forwards, but maybe a rethink about how civil society might act. So I think that's a topic I'm sure many people in this room would love to come back to. We've got one more donor to speak to us, but I thought I would just let you know before we hear from Sabine, you do have the possibility in a little bit to ask some questions. So do start thinking of them in your mind. You can go back to that Slido poll where you'll find the possibility for starting to put your questions if there are things that are already burning at your fingertips. So that's just to give you a little heads up. And I'm now going to turn to Sabine sitting in Brussels and ask her the same question. What are your responses to what you've heard? And can you sketch out a little bit for us how the European Commission is looking at redefining approaches and priorities in terms of themes and geographies in this new world or this evolving world that we are confronting? Sabine, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much and good afternoon. Greetings from Brussels. Let me first thank Helvetas for the invitation to the European Commission to join this important event. And personally, I'm very honored to be with such distinguished members of the development community. As you hinted at, indeed, over the past few years, the European Union has, what we can say, revamped its model of development cooperation, and is in line with all these new global realities that previous speakers have already mentioned. Indeed, we are facing this period of geopolitical tectonic shifts. The world is becoming more dangerous, more crisis-prone than ever before, and the continuation of peace cannot be taken for granted anywhere else in the world. We also see a rise in inequality in all its dimensions, and human security can also not be seen as a given. We've seen in the introduction to your event, climate change and the massive damage that it is causing, unfortunately also in Europe, as we have seen in Spain in the past week. So we needed to adapt. And there has indeed been this paradigm shift deriving from a recognition that, first of all, we believe that we must move away from this donor-recipient dynamic and position ourselves more and more boldly in a logic of partnerships, implying also a win-win. And this in this increasingly contested international environment, where also our partners are looking for options of offers to increase their own strategic autonomy. Secondly, and it has been mentioned by previous speakers, official development assistance, ODA, is dwarfed, especially when compared to private investment flows, remittances, and fortunately, in some cases, also domestic resource mobilization in developing countries. So therefore, we increasingly see at the EU ODA as more a catalyzer to leverage more funding and ensure sound policy choices. And thirdly, over the past decades, countries that have been most successful in reducing poverty are those that have invested in infrastructure, in domestic value addition, in good governance and human development, and thereby integrating their economies in the world trade and investment circuits. So therefore, the EU has adapted by ensuring its focus on transformational areas and with the necessary scale. And the two instruments we are using for that are Global Gateway and Team Europe, and they have come to exemplify this. So let me briefly explain them. The Team Europe approach is basically a new, or at least a recent method to pull together the EU, its member states, the European Investment Bank, and European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in a coordinated manner to maximize impact. And Team Europe has become the delivery method for the EU's international partnerships. And then the Global Gateway. Well, the Global Gateway is our new European investment strategy, which aims at boosting smart, clean, and secure links in 5 priority areas: digital transition, climate and energy, transport, strengthening health system, and investing in education and research systems across the world. So the Global Gateway is the EU's contribution to narrowing the global investment gap worldwide and is geared towards leveraging private investment. And to respond to Catherine, Global Gateway is indeed not a quick fix, but the opposite to that. Global Gateway is at the same time a quantitative offer because we aim to mobilize up to 300 billion of public and private investments by 2027 for sustainable and high quality projects, taking into account the needs of our partners and ensuring lasting benefits for local communities. And at this moment in time, so between 2021 and 2023, already 179 billion of the 300 that we had as an objective in investment was mobilized in partner countries across the world. And this through advancing 225 flagship projects. But the Global Gateway is also a qualitative and a value-based offer that promotes high social and environmental and financial standards and upholds democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Why? Because we have developed a unique 360-degree approach around these Global Gateway investments by ensuring that our values, our democratic values, good governance, human rights, transparency, are ensured, and that there is also focus on the security dimension around our investments. However, and very importantly, while the Global Gateway has become indeed our central, or has become central to our international partnerships, it does of course not cover their full breadth. So there's also a second strand in our development cooperation, where we continue to engage in conflict areas, in fragile countries, and in other complex settings through tailored means. So I do not need to remind this audience that indeed fragility is at a record high. A quarter of the world's population today lives in fragile contexts. 60 contexts are considered fragile according to the OECD, and this number being the largest since the OECD framework that is monitoring fragility was introduced. So these multiple or polycrises, as was mentioned already in recent years, are transforming the global landscape. But there is one commonality, and that is that they have been hitting the hardest the world's most vulnerable people and threatening therewith the 2030 agenda promise of leaving no one behind. So the growing complexity of these contexts call for joint approaches that also address humanitarian needs, sustainable development and peace building. And therefore, we as EU committed ourselves to allocate at least more than 2/3 of our country allocations to the least developed countries in the period 2025-2027. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sabine. So I think three very complementary perspectives from our three different all-European and two EU donors. And I'd like to first turn, well, I can see some very juicy questions coming in, but I would like to give our two keynote speakers maybe a chance to respond just briefly on something they'd like to pick up from what they've heard, because I think there's a question around first of all, Catherine's point about what are the possibilities for a kind of radical reimagining of partnership that actually goes beyond strategic communications, because I think Nicole was a little bit touching on the fact that we can speak beautiful words, but in fact, when the rubber hits the road, things actually need to happen, and we need to be credible. And also, Shabini, I'm reflecting on the fact that you made such a powerful case for evidence-based programming, and often a lot of strategy. I mean, ideally, it's built on an evidence base, but perhaps some of what we're trying to do is not yet proven. So it would be interesting to hear maybe just a quick reflection from the two of you, maybe Catherine first, and then Shabini, and then I'll turn to the audience for some questions to our panelists before the break. So Catherine, please, what are you thinking?
Yes, thinking lots of things. Great panel. And thank you very much for commenting on some points I raised. I just wanted to say that, when you spoke, I think it was Nicole, you suggested that there was a disconnect between the nice, ambitious, visionary appeal I was making and the realpolitik. And my sense is that, and I think it was a little bit alluded to with in what Sabine was saying, there are opportunities given where we are. So there is some of people have referred to it, particularly with respect to Africa and the African kind of political community. There's a kind of shopping around or an option seeking, given the different offer that China is making, Russia to a lesser extent, and other emerging economies. So whilst there is global intensification of global competition and kind of power hungriness, it could be in the interests of the North to position itself to do real partnership and build trust in a market which is much more diverse. Therefore, I think this creates some hope that the visionary appeal I was making could be a self-interested opportunity. I kind of say that. And then just a little word on evidence. So a number of speakers have suggested that the evidence on poverty improvements over time is real, notwithstanding the slippage since 2019. But there's also, and I would agree with you, Antonia, there is also evidence that we're not necessarily gathering, or other sorts of evidence that can give rise to another narrative, and particularly from those who are advocating a transformative agenda. They look to leverage evidence, for example, around Africa's value addition over the last 50 years. We know that real progress on development, whatever that is, can't happen unless you've got growth and transformation, as was suggested by Sabine. And if you look at Africa's history over the last 50 years, it's been one where value addition has been very, very minimal. So that's why the decolonial project will be asking for not just more development assistance, but looking at those other barriers that are preventing, continents like Africa to really emerge in terms of growth. Also looking at questions of debt and restructuring debt, which is also a huge impediment to serious moves on growth. So let me stop there, but fantastic interventions. I'm sure I could say more, but I won't.
Thank you, Catherine. Before I turn to Shabini, I think that Nicole has her finger up, so I'm going to give you the floor.
No, thank you very much. Yes, I did have my finger up. So, Catherine, I needed to correct maybe your impression of my statement. I think we have this dichotomy of this global and shared understanding of the challenges. And we have the geopolitical realities. And these are we live between these two things. But then when we need clarity on what ODA can do in that context, then I think seeing ODA as an investment into a livable future is absolutely crucial. But we also, from the geopolitical side, we have today more arguments than in the past that need to be based on national interest. So what is our national interest in all of this? And I think the EU has formulated, I'm a bit jealous when I look at the volumes, but has formulated it in a way where, yes, we have a collective future that we need to invest in. Yes, we have national interest. We also have a human imperative of solidarity. So to me, it's these three things that we need to balance out. A human imperative, solidarity with extreme poverty, with human suffering. We have an investment in a livable future, the global public's good, the Agenda 2030, climate, health systems, all of that. And we have a national interest because as ODA, we are spending taxpayers' money, whether we like it or not. And so that has to be articulated as well. But one without the others doesn't work.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I mean, I think what you're saying is we're living in a situation of polarities, and the question is, what tools do we have in different places, and how we put them together? I'm going to turn the floor now to Shabini to see if she also has a couple of responses, and then I'm hoping we've got time at least for one question. And although you might be frustrated, you might not have more. For those in the room, you'll be able to call out all these fascinating people or get in contact with them online afterwards and ask them your juicy questions. So Shabini, pardon.
Just a few comments. I couldn't disagree with any of the speakers before me. So I think we are really in what I would call a very converted crowd, so to speak. But that's just two reflections I have listening to the speakers before me. The first is, I think as Nicole, as you pointed out, it's a lot to do with political will. You need political will to be able to do anything. So how can we have, and I don't have an answer here, but how can we sort of have more international cooperation influence political will across countries? And it's a partnership, as you said. So again, one of the things that struck me was what you said was just making the economic benefit more salient. For us, it's a vote bank in India, for instance, right? So to move political will, you need to make it a vote bank issue, and that's what is going to actually create that change. The other way of looking at it is an economic benefit, and that's another, it's not always an economic benefit, but it is very much about people. But then that's not always obvious, unfortunately. The other reflection that I had here was making everyone an equal partner to the solutioning. So we have all of these challenges, but we need equal partnership in the solutioning. And I'll give a very sobering reality check here. So we talk about evidence-informed decision-making, and as a larger network of researchers, we've got about 800 researchers across the world working with us on doing cutting-edge development research on the field. But now, when you look at and I think we also know, for instance, that when local experts are participating in the economic development agenda of that country, they bring a lot deeper reflection and a lot deeper knowledge of the socio-economic and political situation in the countries, in their own countries. But here's a sobering thought, and I was looking up this number just now. Between 1990 and 2019, 3/4 of articles published in the top 20 development journals by researchers were from Western countries, all global north, 73% to be precise. And 10% of presenters in the top development conferences were from, in the top 5 development conferences, 10% of the people presenting were from developing countries. Now, when you think about evidence-informed decision-making, it's the point that I think even Catherine made, who's driving the development? Where is this evidence coming from, right? So a lot more local investments in research infrastructure, human talent in developing countries, with that building that capacity so that we are able to build our own infrastructure for this kind of work. And I gave some examples earlier on where we've done this research in India, which is now being taken in different parts of the world. But I think that's the other reflection I had.
Great. Thank you very much, Shabini. I think an extremely important call for greater diversity and inclusion in terms of representation and research and evidence gathering as these decisions are made. Now, we do have a chance for me to pose one of the questions that you have asked, and thank you very much, those that have contributed questions. What I'm going to do in the interest of time is I'm going to share the question, and I'm going to ask each of you to respond to it, and then you can add on the end the thing I was going to ask you to do at the end, which is your wrap-up point, the thing that you would like everybody to take away. And that means we'll get a chance to hear from each of you, including our colleagues online, before we close for the break. And the question I'm choosing is particularly relevant, I think, because of who we have sitting here with us today. And some brilliant person, either sitting in front of us or in the ether around us, has asked whether the panelists could comment on the dynamics amongst donors. How can you donors work together in a more strategic way to increase efficiency, sustainability, and impact? So, I mean, I like this question because we've talked a lot about, how do you get from the vision of, United Nations, a world where the majority and minority world are in better balance, all of these lovely ideas that we believe in our heart. But in fact, one of the places where we could start modeling and practicing this behavior, in fact, is in the world of the donors. Each of you having described so clearly what you're thinking and about how you're trying to shift to get your job done in this very different world. So I would like to ask each of you, and I shall go in the reverse order from before. So obviously, I recognise Catherine and Shabini. You are not as in a position as donors, but you might like to give them some advice. How do you think the donors might work together better? And then I shall ask Sabine, and then Maria, and then Nicole to finish off, if that's okay. And if you have, in addition to that, a final brilliant insight that you wish the audience to take away with them, you're most welcome to add it. So, Catherine, I come to you first. Thanks.
Wow, that wasn't fair.
Sorry.
I was ready, but I will say the thing that came to mind was that, I presented the work that ODI is doing to try and convene donors over the next 12 to 18 months around this conversation to try and come to some consensus around what the purpose of development is and what the rationale, because it's important to increasingly have a really clear business case for development given where we are. However, what is clear is that the biggest progress that's ever been made on agenda setting in the space has tended to follow the path of visionary individuals. It takes somebody or a group to step up and make the robust, ambitious statement about where to go, and then crowd in the others. I'm thinking about, for example, the progress made on debt around HIPIC, some maybe 20 years ago now, 24 years ago, because it was Jubilee. And that took, political leadership at the head of state level with a Minister of Finance was particularly invested to rally others around. And so whilst political will is important, political leadership, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of that in getting us through what we believe to be an antipathy towards the development agenda.
Thank you, Catherine. So donors, make sure that you have visionary leadership if you're not already, and we know that you here are providing that. But maybe this is something that we can work on. Interesting to hear as well what we think about movements coming from below. There's a lot of social movements and civil society movements that are also pushing in this direction. Shabini, would you like to add a final thought before I continue my journey around our panel?
How can I let this chance go? Just two words. I think I second everything that Catherine said, but just flexible, long-term funding. I think that's what actually is missing, because things are time-bound, I understand, but investing in people and investing in organizations requires that long-term patient capital, and not always having, while numbers and outcomes are important, not always having that, you don't have your eye on the ball, you need to have accountability, but it needs time and patience.
Yeah, I mean, and that links very much, thanks Shabini, to what Melchior told us at the beginning, which is it's the job of people in this room, those you're working with and for, to take a long-term view, even though there are things we must react to and work on immediately. That's very important. Thank you, Shabini. So I think I promised next to go to you, Sabine. So the question about how can donors better work together, and you're not allowed to answer Team Europe again, although I'm sure you're tempted to do so, and any final takeaway that you have for us. And of course, if you want to talk about Team Europe, far be it from me to stop you.
No, thanks again. Well, let me perhaps be a bit provocative and let me contest the concept of donors, because we very much feel that we entered now an era of partnerships built on the principle that our partner countries have a better understanding of what will help their economies, their societies thrive than Western donors do. So countries want more and more in all the conversations that we have. They want equal partnerships. And this cannot exist if one is only the donor and the other one is only the receiver. So we really, let's say, push for a partnerships which we are building together and move away from this unbalanced relationship between a senior donor and a junior recipient to indeed this partnership of equals. In terms of what we can do better, well, indeed, coordinate and align our efforts. That's something that we do, of course, with big donors, be it the US, the UN. We have all these structured dialogues to make sure that we reinforce each other's efforts and not duplicate which still happens because it's a crowded space in development cooperation, but still there have been very good efforts to coordinate and align. Also to pool resources. If we know from each other where we invest, we can also pool resources and reinforce the impact through our actions. And what we've also done, at least at EU level, is to promote transparency and accountability. So everyone knows where we are providing funding. And you mentioned Team Europe, and I will mention it, but because we've just launched a Team Europe tracker, so everyone can see where we have invested in a Team Europe approach. So just to enhance transparency and accountability of our investments. In terms of what you asked us, the one thing that you want your audience to take away, well, I would say despite this paradigm shift in development cooperation, at EU level, our objective has in no way changed. It remains really to foster the sustainable economic, social, and environmental development of developing countries with the primary aim of eradicating poverty. And this is outlined in our treaty, the Treaty of the European Union. What indeed has changed is we have upgraded our method to do so. But we continue to engage in conflict areas, in fragile countries, and in other complex settings through our tailored means, with always the primary objective of addressing the root causes of fragility, while also providing access to life-saving basic services and promoting the resilience of populations. And we do that along the humanitarian development and peace nexus that we are rolling out in several theaters. So through the Global Gateway, we have in no way abandoned human development. On the contrary, as I have mentioned, 2 of the 5 priority areas are really focusing on human development, education and health. So to conclude, our compass at EU level firmly remains the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, as also, by the way, confirmed in the mission letter of our future Commissioner. He has his hearing in the European Parliament tomorrow, so I hope he passes together with all the other commissioners and that a new commission can take office either at the end of the year or the beginning of 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sabine. And I think I just want to make an observation about partner countries, which is, of course, things look different from different levels. Things look different whether you're a government and what kind of government you are, from the private sector and from civil society. And I think that's an area of nuance that we could probably go into some more. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and we must hear from Maria and Nicole. So, Maria, if you'd like to have your final word, and then Nicole, thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, I think there is a lot of things we can do to improve our work. I think up to now we have maybe focused on taking different responsibilities, not to duplicate, instead of actually having a joint analysis with our partner country on what is the way forward, and maybe pool funds and work more jointly. And I just want to say also that maybe as, final words, that we need to remember that, any country's most important investment is to invest in its people. Because it's only people that actually can actually change natural resources, innovations, up to something that is valuable. And therefore, any country's most important investment anywhere in the world is to invest in its people. And I think we need to remember that.
Thank you very much, Maria. That's a very important remark in our penultimate place. And then I turn the floor finally to Nicole. What would you like to wrap up with?
Now, I wish you had the last word, because that was a perfect closing to it. But the question was, how do donors among themselves deal with all these issues? So yes, there are donor self-help groups. We get together and we bemoan how difficult it is.
Therapy.
We're very good at analysis. We're not always that good at then translating this into coherent joint action, because we are a political instrument of our respective governments. And this is a challenge, and this is something we have to live with, and we have to also do the best we can with what we have, in a sense. I totally agree with Sabine's point about donors and recipients. This is not a win-win interpretation of what we need to have real partnerships. But it's also the donor expression, the use of the word, by now rarely comes from the so-called North and very often comes from the so-called South. So it takes, for partnerships, it doesn't just take 2, it actually takes a lot more. So for me, maybe 2 last words. One is, if we want to achieve sustainable development, it is a partnership that is not just governments, it's not just civil society, it's not just academia, it's not just the private sector, it truly is the teamwork of humanity. And my second piece of advice, can we try not to do everything anew? Let's have a look at what actually works. I mean, Catherine, you've drawn a vision of pooling money, pooling benefits, pooling decision-making. This exists. It's called the multilateral system. It's dysfunctional, but we created it. It exists. We can make it work. If we create new things all the time, we're just actually splitting our efforts and our resources further.
Great. Well, thank you. I think it's important also, Nicole, that we end on a note of, everything isn't broken. We have the tools in our hands, maybe not as much resources as we would like, and maybe not as much political will as we like, but plenty of evidence, plenty of energy, and plenty of inspiration. So with that, I would really like to thank this brilliant panel. Thank you, those who joined us online. Thank you who are here on the panel. And we will close now for a break. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And before releasing you into the break, let me give you some framework remarks of what is there to explore during it. First of all, we would like to thank the online participants for their numerous participation, because we are ending the live stream with this first part, and we will continue only with the guests here in the room in the second part. So thank you very much. A last wave to the camera there in the back. Thank you very much for joining us so numerously. During the break, there is a photo booth back in the end of the room there, where you see a green wall, so to say. You are welcome to take a picture there and create a powerful message related to today's topic. Something you come up with, something maybe that stuck in your head from this first part of the afternoon. There are 3 backgrounds you can choose from, and you will receive the photo tomorrow and can post it on LinkedIn or any other social media with the hashtag Helvetas Symposium 2024. The photo booth will also be up and running during the apéro at the end of the event. After the break, we will continue in German and in French, and there will be interpretation available if you would want so into English. There won't be between German and French. You can grab a headset at the end, towards the window on the right there from me on the left if you're facing me when you leave the room or when you come back after the break. Please be back with the second gong, which is going to be at 4:20. So enjoy your break, inspiring exchanges, some coffee, some tea, some fruits on the first floor downstairs. See you back here at 20 past. Thank you very much.